Go ahead, Deb. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. It's Thursday, 8:21, and we do have a quorum present. To get us started, we're going to work on the agenda. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the agenda as it is in your packet? Julie, seconded by Jesse. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Next, we have public comment. Deb, I don't see anybody here in the gallery. Do we have anybody online that would like to speak?
We do not.
Okay. Thank you. That closes our first public comment, and we'll move on to general announcements. I have none this evening. Does anyone have any general announcements? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda has our board meeting minutes from July, our committee meeting summaries, our board of directors meeting runtime that we discussed last time, and determining reasonableness document. The reason those two are under there is we had discussion and consensus, but we didn't take a formal vote. So that's why it's in the consent agenda, just honoring the wishes of us from last month. Would anyone like to bring the consent agenda up for motion? Georgia, and seconded by Jesse. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you so much. That also passed unanimously. I appreciate everyone. Next, Rich, we're going quickly here. It is you with the Ownership Linkage Task Force update.
Perfect, and I'm going to continue this trend of quickness. Just some updates. Ypsilanti Township, we are going to be meeting with them Friday, September 26th at 10 a.m. City Ypsi, we're still working through some scheduling with them. And then, or that's about City Ypsi. And then with the Ann Arbor folks, I'm still working with City Council Member Briggs to find a date to meet with her. That's all I got.
Wonderful. Any questions for Rich? Seeing none, we'll move on. Deb, has Mike entered the building yet?
He is. I don't see him though. Like his screen is blank.
Okay, can you hear him, or can we hear? The reason I'm asking is he's up for recommendation to not monitor policy 2.5.1.2 on page.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are, Mike. Hi.
Hi.
We're ready for you on the discussion for not to monitor policy 2.5.1.2 fare changes.
Okay. You probably can't see me because I can't see my picture either, but that doesn't matter as long as you can hear me. Yes, the Finance Committee met, and Matt had actually made a recommendation not to monitor the 2.5.12 policy relative to increases in fares. There hasn't been any increases in fares in a very long time. There's none in the plan for next year. And so we thought that it would not be worth anybody's time to actually do a monitoring report of that and for the board to vote on it. So we are very strongly and unanimously recommending that we just not do it, at least for this year.
Does anyone have any questions for Mike? Seems pretty straightforward. Would anyone like to make a motion to take the recommended action? Go ahead.
I would like to make a motion to not monitor policy 2.5.12.
Okay. Do I have a second? That would be Rich. Any discussion on the motion as it was presented? Seeing none. Oh, yes, Julie, you have.
Oh, I just wanted to add from our meeting that because we vote on fare changes as a board, we don't need to monitor the policy because we vote on it if they're going to be fare changes. If that makes sense.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So
it's just a added anything. Okay, you can ignore it.
All right, so we'll go back to Chris's original motion, seconded by Julie. And any other discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thanks to the Finance Committee and Mike for working on that this year. Is this going to be sort of then the yearly cadence that the finance committee will be looking at the fare policy? If we haven't had any fare changes, then they will continue to recommend that we don't monitor? Did we get that far with the decision, or this is just for this year and putting a Band-Aid on it?
Actually, we did not discuss that. However, I think that would be a wise thing to do.
I didn't hear that last part. However, what?
I think it would be wise that we do skip in years when there's nothing in the past year and nothing planned for the next year. And as Julie said, of course, it's an important policy. Only the board can approve a fair change. And I think we would all know about it if it happened without coming to the board. And so it just seems that that's not only the case for this year, but that should be the case going forward.
Okay, fair enough. All right, we'll just keep looking at it from year to year then. Yes, Jesse?
With that in mind, and considering that the board does have to approve all fare changes, would it make sense to then just change the monitoring cadence to only monitor this policy when, like, ad hoc, rather than having an actual schedule? So we don't need to keep voting on it year after year?
I believe it actually says as needed. Let me double check that.
Oh, was that what it was?
I believe we made that change very recently.
Okay, so it's just when we did all those changes, this particular monitoring period didn't get captured with that?
The fare policy says frequency only as needed in September.
So we shouldn't need to hold any more votes unless we actually want to monitor the policy. The assumption is that we will not be monitoring this policy.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay.
And I certainly agree too.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we're all on the same page, and we just voted, so we are done with this unless anyone else has any other discussion. No, well, seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to governance process policies. Page 21 of your book. Also, Deb, did you put process policies in front of? Okay. All right. There was an additional surveyor that didn't get captured in the survey that you had in your packet. So the updated one is on the table for you. It doesn't change anything very much. As a general rule, the governance process policies 3.0 through 3.4, the board didn't seem to have a lot of concern or discussion. Does anyone have anything they'd like to raise or ask questions about with regards to those policies? Yes, Jesse?
I just want to acknowledge that I still find the policy on board, the board shouldn't comment on staff performance. I find that difficult to comply with because we want to commend staff when they do well. We receive reports on staff performance, say, oh, so-and-so did something amazing, and we're like, that sounds great, they did a good job, and that there is a comment on their performance. I don't know, I feel like I do understand the spirit of that policy, but the letter, I don't feel reflects the spirit of the policy. I feel like the letter of it is too strict, and anyway, I just want to acknowledge that I still find this one difficult to comply with.
And actually, Jesse, this has been coming up since, I've been on the board since 2018. It's never been fully satisfied. We hear from the CEO that it is, of course, obviously okay to say, Dina, job well done. I think the important part was, if you have a concern or trying not to shed a light on maybe negative things, or being too positive with one person and leaving other people out can be problematic. I'm wondering, since we have had this problem now for 5, 6, 7 years, that Jesse makes a very good point. Perhaps what we need to do is recraft this policy in a way that makes more sense, that's not so punitive, because it does say in the policy during policy monitoring reports. However, we also receive draft budget reports, and we receive service committee or service reports and financial reports. So I'm wondering, would the board be amenable to allowing the governance committee, since these are governance process policies, to maybe review this policy and come up with wording that would maybe help alleviate this sort of conundrum in the future?
Yes, I would appreciate that for my part.
Are there any board members that are adverse to that? All right, not hearing any negative, we will go ahead and assign the governance committee to look at the wording and try to come up with something, work with Sue, and come up with something that works out a little bit better in our favor, so that we can still be congratulatory to staff, but not in a way that violates policy. Were there any other policies in here? Oh, yes, hi, Mike. Mike, I believe you're still muted. I see your hand raised, but I don't see anything else or hear you.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
All right, I don't know why you can't see me. I can't see me either, but I'm glad you can hear me. The fact that we have a no and we have not in this reporting period, to me, that's confusing and unnecessary, because I think these reports are supposed to cover the reporting period. So why is that different? Why is a no different from no instance in this reporting period? Seems to me like we should just have a simple yes or no, but maybe there's something I'm not seeing there.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I believe it was in May, we came up with this with policies 3.5 through 3.8 and had this very discussion. But because the policies backed up onto each other, this policy still came out with the same survey questions. But I believe that we voted to remove and just have yes or no, if my brain is working correctly. Is that right, Deb? I see you kind of shaking your head. Yes. So we did address that. And so next year it'll only see yes and no, not have the third option. Is that good, Mike?
Oh, yes, of course.
Awesome. Any other questions or concerns about the policies as they are in your manual? I did write out some interesting responses to some of the questions, because I believe that everyone deserved an answer. And rather than read them tonight, if you will allow me, I will just forward my responses to you, because it clarifies some things in there. Like in one area, someone asked if the agenda item has to go through the governance committee before it can be added on. It actually, the agenda is handled by the CGO, who is also known as the chair. And so it's the chair that makes the decision based on their knowledge of the agenda. Can it be fit in? Does it need to go to committee first? Does it based on time and stuff like that. So it's sort of like housekeeping answers. Would you be okay for me to just forward these answers on to you rather than read them all? All right, I'm seeing a head nodding yes. So are there any other things that people want to pull out of this monitoring report to discuss? Yes, Jesse.
There wasn't a lot of board members, but I think it's important, especially as we have, new members, and the role of ownership linkage. Even though there was only, for policy 321, there was only one person who felt that we were not fully in alignment with that policy, but I thought they had some very insightful questions on that. And I'm wondering if maybe if it might be time to do a refresher on what ownership linkage means for individual board members.
We could do that, but we could also, one of the questions on there was that they were wondering if the entire board is aware of what is said at these meetings. And I just want to say that the OLTF has just completed their first introductory meetings with all 3 municipalities. They just began the cadence. They haven't moved forward to actually hearing a lot of information. That will be coming forward. Rich does provide a report, a verbal report at every board meeting. And as we meet with future, with the township, with IPSI, with Ann Arbor, and we get that information will be shared with the board via Rich's report. So we're not there yet because we haven't had our second round of meetings to be able to dive right into that. But Jesse, you make a really good point about how does the board outside of the OLTF act as the definitive linkage between TheRide and with our customers, our moral owners, our legal owners. And I'm wondering if you have any, bringing that question up, do you have any solutions or thoughts on that?
Off the top of my head, all I'm coming up with is a presentation from our governance consultant, but maybe, spending some more, like I said, just off the top of my head, that's what I'm coming up with. I also wanted to talk about the following policy. The member shall maintain effective ambassadorship and coordinated advocacy. And there were some questions like, well, is that the responsibility of each individual board member, of all board members? And I think maybe I think that was I don't know if that's one of the questions that you have an answer for.
I do.
Okay.
But I think you make a really good point, Jesse, that this area is also we're still learning and growing in this area and are taking our baby steps between OLTF and what does it mean to be a board member and to engage with our public, with our legal owners and all of that. And perhaps we could use this and put a pin in it. And maybe, because we're coming up on the end of the fiscal year, we could then add that to our board education and make it an education item for Sue to actually come in and talk with us. Because the other question I would have then, are these policies, and Matt, you probably know, are those just boilerplate policies that we're talking about? Do you remember? Or are these policies that we're talking about, were they recrafted to meet our needs? I'm curious about that.
And I believe the question is about Chapter 3, the governance process policies.
Yes, specifically surrounding OLTF and surrounding the board being the linkage to our owners.
These are, if memory serves, entirely boilerplate policies specific to policy governance. How we choose to execute the ownership linkage seems to vary from board to board.
Yeah, no, I hear that. So it may be worthwhile to add this to our, keep this in mind. Deb, do you keep notes about things that we say like this, where we're wanting to remember?
I think, so it sounds like we, some board education on the role of the responsibility of board members for ownership linkage. And I think in particular, so one policy that I'm fairly certain is not boilerplate because it mentions member municipalities. And I think while I don't have a problem with the policy, I think that it is important for us to receive some guidance on how we maintain effective ambassadorship and coordinated advocacy without, while, making sure that we are speaking, not the role of, that we're not just speaking for ourselves and lobbying for our own special interests, that we are. I think coordinated is doing a lot of work in this particular policy. I would want to have that, I think that specifically is something that might be helpful.
Sounds good. Did you have any other things? No? Anybody else? All right, great. Then we're going to go ahead and move on to policy language discussion if needed. Sounds like we kind of took care of most of it. There was one item that came up while we were looking through this, and I had asked the board for your favor in terms of last year and the year before, we found out there are other job duties that we have that are not captured in our policies, and that would be surrounding procurement, specifically general legal counsel, also the auditors, the auditing firm that we hire, as well as the governance consultant where we participate. But that is not listed under our job duties as it's been written. And it's been a concern of mine that we want future boards to know that that is also their responsibility. We don't want to lose that if a new CEO were to come in or changes were to take place, personnel changes. So I drafted up some suggested language on page 38 that says, participate in the procurement process of both general legal counsel and auditing firm alongside staff. And why I said that was because it's a blend. I talked with Michelle Whitlow, who is the procurement manager with AAATA, and it's sort of like not an even number, it's always got to be an odd number, but trying to get as many staff and board members in line for each one of those, and it's a shared responsibility because the auditors also have to work with staff and also legal counsel has to work with staff. So we want to make sure that everyone is on the right page. The reason the second one says be the definitive decision maker in the procurement of a governance consultant is while the governance consultant assists the CEO with his monitoring reports and things like that, the board should have most of the deciding votes. This last year, we invited Mr. Carpenter to sit with us and help guide us and gave him voting privileges, which we were able to do under policy. But I want to make sure that it's understood that the governance consultant the majority of their job is to be here for the board. And so that's why I did that. But I'm open to rewording, wordsmithing or whatever, and I'm very anxious to hear what other board members think about this. Or do you like it just the way it is and we don't need to talk about it? All right, I'm not seeing any discussion on this. Would someone then like to make a motion to adopt this policy language, 3.2.1.3, as I read, participate in the procurement process of both general legal counsel and auditing firm alongside staff, be the definitive decision maker in the procurement of a governance consultant? That would be Julie, seconded by Jesse. Any discussion on the motion as it was presented? Yes, Jesse.
I'm sorry, I was reading, and I don't know if you actually did speak to this, but so since we're calling out that we are the definitive decision maker with the governance consultant, we are, as far as legal counsel and auditing firms, we are just one voice alongside staff.
Yeah, that's why it says participate in, and it would be not just one. So I believe, Michelle, told me there were 5 involved, and I believe it was 2 or 3 board members and 2 or 3 staff. I can't remember how it flowed out, but it was important to have an odd number so that you don't get that tie. And so that's the reason for the difference.
So it's a majority vote in those instances, and do we have that process laid out? Or is that an internal policy to the RIDE?
It's an internal process from what Michelle told me.
Okay. I don't think I have a problem with that.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood what
Absolutely.
What was and wasn't covered. All right.
Absolutely. Any other discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that also passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone, so much. Now we're going to move on to the draft budget, and that's Ms. Dina Reed. You weren't expecting us to be so fast, were you?
Room for my whole binder up there.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present the draft budget to you. The draft budget was sent along with your packet. The full draft budget document looks like this. What I'm going to present to you today are some highlights and some updates from some of the things we've talked
about before, and then some more detail on the capital plan and some things that I think might be of special interest to you throughout the budget process. And in the end of this, at the end of this, I'll give a conclusion and talk about some of our next steps that get us through to our budget proposal, which we plan to present next month. So I always like to start by reminding folks kind of how we get here. The budget is prepared in the context and in a strategic way that aligns with the board's strategic goals, our business plan, and then furthers execution of our projects and our operating plan. So all of the business plan elements do link to board-approved goals or ends. And then from there, from the long-range plan, we start to really drill down from a multi-year plan to a single-year plan so that we can really think about how are we going to execute this on an annual basis? How much funding do we need? How much funding do we have? And those sorts of things. So the budget is part of the execution phase, as well as providing transportation services and projects that we budget for each fiscal year. As I mentioned, the budget is aligned with business plan priorities. I've put this up so we can just remind ourselves some of the key categories of the business plan. We are focused on excellence in service delivery and customer retention. We're focusing on attracting new riders and increasing ridership, and of course, maintaining current ridership. And we're continuously looking at internal processes or processes that even impact the external customers to see how we can be more efficient in what we do. We take the opportunity, we budget and plan for team and staff development. We're focused on sustainability in many ways throughout our organization. So these are all things that we are cognizant of as we are developing our budget process, as we are developing the budget. And with that, I want to just mention that we're going to talk just a little bit about the operating budget today. We've talked in more detail about the operating budget in the last couple of meetings. This meeting, I'm going to have a little more detail on the capital. So I'm going to cover operating at a higher level, but then focus a little more information about the capital budget since we haven't really addressed that yet. To start out, budget preview summary here just kind of tells you what the key highlights are of the budget. We are operating at full service levels, which is now our millage, consistent with our first full year of the millage. We are experiencing lower state operating assistance. We've been talking about this consistently, and I'll address this in a little more detail coming up. We are presenting now in the draft and will be presenting a balanced budget, which is a state requirement, but also just prudent. Certainly don't want to spend more than what we have, so we will always be presenting a balanced budget. We are going to be presenting a capital budget where all of the projects for this fiscal year are funded. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between one fiscal year and multi-years, but we present everything in the context of multiple years, both on the operating and the capital side. So let's start with the operating budget. As I mentioned, our operating budget is balanced. We are at about $71.3 million right now on the operating expenses and revenues. There aren't any significant changes in the budget from what we presented last time. The activities from last time to this time are going back through assumptions, testing our own assumptions, gathering more information from like what's going on externally, things that can impact us, looking at the internal assumptions and saying, does this still look reasonable? Can we afford this? We've also been making progress on our initiatives. We've had several meetings internally about initiatives that we want to do. We've been able to incorporate some initiatives into the expenses that you see here. So while it hasn't gone up significantly, we're focused on key initiatives that further the board's ends and the continuous improvement aspects that we were talking about earlier. But for the most part, we were pretty close to this last month. We're expecting to be pretty much at this level by September when we present the budget. So I don't expect any major swings here. Another thing I want to touch on is just the big thing going on from 25 to 26 is a shift in some of our revenue source. We see a lot more property tax revenue based on the millage, which was expected and projected. We are very, very close to our projections in property tax revenues, but budget to budget, there's a good increase in there. We hadn't budgeted that increase initially because we wanted to make sure it was going to happen before we started planning expenses according to those revenues. But we do have more information now, and we are very comfortable with the property tax revenue assumptions that we have in here, which is great because one of the downsides of this budget year is that we are seeing real concern from the LBO funding for the state. And for just kind of slow down for a second and remind everyone what I'm talking about. State operating assistance is a line in our operating budget. We also call it LBO funding, which is bus operating funding that the state provides. The state provides a percentage of operating expenses to all transit agencies in the state. We're an urban agency, and so our percentages typically run around 30%. In the past, you can see they have ran around 30%. This graph, the graph on the right, talking about LBO funding, shows funding sources over the past 10 plus years and the correlating percentage that we've gotten from the state. So the state budget, they budget how much they want to spend for transportation, and then it trickles down into this is how much that the public transit gets, and then from there, they say how much of the public transit budget is for operating. Then they calculate that into a percentage for every agency based on the total expenses that we tell them we're gonna have. So they collect all the expenses from all agencies in the state. They say this is how much money we have. If we split that appropriately, what will the percentage have to be that each agency will get in order to fund their operating budget? And so the percentage for this fiscal year has gone down to about 26%. This is a big issue for us because it's several $1 million in our budget. But currently, or in the most recent information that we have, is that we don't know if that additional funding that has showed up, excuse me, in 24 or 25 will be there in 2026. So we are budgeting conservatively and appropriately based on what the state has told us to budget on. They've told us to plan for 26% because we don't know if we're going to get that other funding. So that's what we're budgeting on, and I wanted to make sure that everyone knew what that assumption was. We did run some scenarios, and I did share this before, but it's such an important aspect of our revenue right now. I wanted to show it again. So the green line are the revenues that we expect to have in total, not just from LBO, but in total, compared to the expenses, which is the red line. The dotted lines on this chart show what our total operating revenues will be if LBO is not according to the green line. The green line is what we're getting now, which is 29%. What we put in the budget is the orange dotted line, and that orange dotted line comes very close to that red line. That is something we are cautiously watching because you can see that over the next few years, if it stays at this level, we are going to be very close to our projections for operating expenses. So we are just, mindful of that, being as prudent as we can, running different scenarios to be careful. Of course, this is only one source of revenue, but it's something that you can see how big of an impact it can make. I do want to share that just day before yesterday, when we were at MPTA, MDOT did for the first time reference the potential worst case scenario of this percentage going to 24%. They did say that we should not budget for that right now, that they are still fairly comfortable with the 26%, but they did run what they called the worst case scenario based on funding. And they think that worst case scenario could be as low as 24%. We haven't adjusted the budget for that because the state has told us not to change our plans, so we're not doing that right now. I just wanted to be very transparent with you about what we're hearing and how volatile this is, especially when, you can see historically they've been able to find other funding to get us up closer to that 30%. And all of a sudden, it's dropping to like potentially 26% or potentially 24%. So we're going to put a little bit of faith in Lansing and hope that as they work through the budget process and have all the things, the meetings that they have, that they can come to a conclusion that they can at least get us back to, you know, the 26% that we're budgeting now, and maybe even up a little bit closer to 27 or 28. It's not a done deal, but I just wanted to share what our assumption is in our budget and what potential impacts could be of that. So to summarize what's going on in the budget right now for the operating side, our revenues are still going up in total, even though we're really struggling here with the operating assistance because of the property tax revenue coming in really, really strong and where we expected it to be. So that's good news. Expenses are going up a little bit more than revenues this year because last year we actually had budgeted for $1 million surplus. So that's why these numbers don't completely even out to zero when you look at the ups and the downs. But the bottom line is we are, even with the increased expenses and the increased revenues that we have, our budget is balanced and revenues do equal expenses. And I do want to share that based on this budget and the current projections, and this is also in your budget document, that we do expect that we see that the financial outlook is stable through the end of the current millage period. We don't have any major concerns that this won't come to fruition, but we are going to have to keep an eye on the state operating assistance and see how things go. We could also have other upsides to other revenue, even if that does drop a little bit more. So again, this is our budget. This is based on what we know best today. And we'll continue to monitor it and keep the board informed both through the budget process and also through the quarterly reporting as we present financial reports through next fiscal year. I want to pause and see if anybody has any questions about anything I just talked about before I move on to the capital discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if this is a Jeff question or not. I know there's talk, and maybe it's too speculative for this point, but how does it work if the state government shuts down?
So Jeff can certainly answer. I will just say what we heard at MPTA in the last few days. If the government does not reach an agreement on the budget and pass a budget for next fiscal year, it would shut down. What that means for us is that, there's a whole other process that they'll continue, and Jeff can explain that further. But what that means for us is that we would, depending on the scenario and what exactly happens, we would not be able to get our funding from the state. We could continue with our budget. We are still okay to assume that it will pass at some point and there will be funding. And if it's anything significantly different than what we've budgeted, we would address that and then, if needed, come back to the board for an amendment. But we will not receive any of those funds until a budget gets passed. So when we budget for these funds, the way this works is we spend the money and we get reimbursed by the state. So what would happen is we would spend money, but we would not be able to get reimbursed for the state. It's not a panic situation for us. We're in a good, strong cash position. So we are fortunate compared to other agencies in that way. We also don't always get those reimbursements like every month. We usually do them a quarter at a time. So we really wouldn't feel, we would not really feel the impact immediately. It's just the way that we do the finance and the reimbursement from the state. So for us, it's not ideal, and it is concerning, but it is something that I feel confident we could weather. Jeff, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you summed it up really well. The only other thing that MDOT did mention is that their staff and resources would of course not be available during a state government shutdown. And just to remind folks, I think in the last 25 years or so, there have been 2 state government shutdowns. One lasted 4 hours, one lasted 2 hours. So more often than not, it solves itself pretty quick.
Okay, thank you both. This does feel a little different though this time. Yeah.
I have a question on top of that then. So worst case scenario, there's a shutdown. And we have funds available. We have our capital stash, but we also have money that we've set aside. I believe it's 2.5 months worth of payroll and things like that. So if worst came to worst, which one would you recommend dipping into if we were to have something like this? Not that I'm trying to call it to us, but I just want to figure out what our future may potentially look like.
We would draw on the the operating reserve first. That's what that's there for. It's there for situations that could occur where we need cash flow, where it doesn't come. We also have a little bit more fund balance that's not set aside specifically in a reserve. It's not a huge amount of money, but it is enough that between the two, it would definitely get us above the 2.5 months. So right now, just to remind everyone, we're at 2 months of operating reserve, or we're technically, I think, about 2.2 or 2.3, but our requirement is now two months. And we did that because we do have some additional fund balance, and so we felt that was enough, and we still feel that way. But I would definitely either rely a little bit more on our fund balance or start digging into that reserve just a little bit. Obviously, if it went on even longer, then we'd be talking about the capital reserve, but I think it would have to go on for some time for that to occur.
The only other thing I would add is the potential for a continuing resolution at the state level in which things would continue at FY25 levels.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yes, and there's a question from Mike.
Yeah, not a question. I just wanted to mention that the board would have to approve any funds taken from the capital reserve, but they do not have to approve anything that comes from the operating reserve.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any other questions for Dina at this time? It's all yours.
All right, great. So let's talk a little bit about the capital budget. So I just want to remind all, this is also information in your packet, but when we think about how we fund capital projects, we think about what do we need to do with our money. The first thing that's really critical is maintaining our existing assets. So the project priorities are on the slide listed on the left. So maintaining existing services and assets that we have are identified in the state of good repair. So when you're looking at the capital budget and you see these categories, state of good repair, value added, and expansion, this is what it means. We're either maintaining our existing services, we're putting things in a bucket called value added to make things better or explore new things, or we're doing more things. We're expanding significantly on what we have, or having a major project that is adding something we don't have, so it's more considered an expansion of services category. Right now, our capital project total for just 2026 is $30.6 million. I do expect this to change a little bit before we get to September. I expect it probably to go down just a little bit. Some of the discussions we've been having in the last week or so are about timing of projects. And there are some projects that might move around a little bit or get pushed out just for the sake of the timeline that we have to do the projects and really just our own further examination to say, can we execute on all these projects on this plan? So there might be some small changes, but I don't expect it to go up at this point. I do want to share also that our capital budget for fiscal year 26 is fully funded. What we ask you to approve in September every year is essentially 1 year. You can see that we have many years of projects planned, and all of the 26 projects are funded, but I want to be clear that all of the projects on the capital plan to completion are not funded. You can see at the very bottom of this table, the unfunded percentage is 38% of projects. They are in the outer years. So the projects that are coming in 26 and for the next few years are funded. There's a slide later, I'll show a little bit more about that. But essentially, we think we're good to go for 26 and for the next couple of years. And then as we get further out, we start to have projects where we're going to need more funding. If we don't find funding for those projects in the timeline that we've allotted here, we would start probably delaying projects or moving them out a little bit until we can identify funding sources for them. We wouldn't just continue to present a budget and ask for approval if there's no funding. So we would have to move things around and fund what we can with what we have. So to progress on that and give you a little bit more detail, here are the categories that I talked about a few minutes ago. Here's a little bit more detail in each of those categories. I'm not going to go through all of these, but they are in your booklet. There are descriptions for all of these, and we are still working on kind of filling out some of those descriptions. So you'll see even more robust descriptions by the time we get to September. But for now, there's an initial description for each of these projects for you to reference in your document. Again, we're at about 30.6 million in the projects. And I wanted to also share the funding sources on the right side. Generally show that right now, all of the funding that we're using for the capital projects, it starts with federal grants. So we're using a lot of federal grants to fund these projects. And the state is matching our federal grant contributions right now fully. So for 2026, all of the federal grants that we get that require a local match will be matched by the state. And then we have earmarks as well. So that's a smaller percentage, but we have them. We're very excited about it. And some of those are mostly federal earmarks as well, and they have a state contribution to them as well. So far, we've been fortunate that the state is able to do that. They haven't given us any indication to be concerned about the capital match on projects yet. So really the big focus has been on LBO funding, but they've been able to continue to fund the capital project match. So that's not something that we're concerned about today or in the near future. I just have no indication that that will be an issue until I hear otherwise. So even though we ask you to approve a single year budget, there are implications to approving the budget when you get to some of these larger projects, which brings me to my next slide. The little graph at the top or the kind of shows one specific project that is an expansion project on our capital plan. The YTC project you can see in fiscal 2026, we have plans to start using money for construction in fiscal 2026. What that implies, if we move forward with that, is that in our plan, we would expect to be able to continue construction over the next 3 years. It would not be prudent to start a construction project and then stop at any point. So we will be coming to the board before we get to the construction phase, sharing with the board the funding plan for not just the YTC project, but any project that we have construction for. But I do want to point out, this is probably the first year in a long time that when we approve this budget, there's an implication that we are planning for future years on a project. So if there were any major concerns with any project in the expansion program, we would want to hear about that before we get too far into this, because it is something that we're pursuing. So I think we've done a lot of outreach on the YTC. That's going to continue. There's going to be more coming to the board on that. When we present the construction project for approval, it will have a funding plan included. Forrest and I will be teaming up and giving probably joint presentations on the funding and projects, and we'll keep you up to date on those. And like I said, this is just an example, but I wanted to share it because it really is the first time that we've had an implication like this for multi-years on a construction project. So I wanted to share that. The chart at the bottom is illustrative of something important that's happening with us right now with our low-no funding. As you all know, we have been awarded a low-no grant, but we have not obligated it yet. So in our current capital plan, we are assuming that we will get that low-no funding, and that low-no funding will help fund some of our state of good repair vehicles over the next few years. We are being conservative in the budget and assuming that we don't get that funding until 2027. We're certainly hoping it comes sooner, but just so you know, we have funded the 26 projects without the assumption that the low-no funding will come in 26. If it does, that's great. That gives us more flexibility. It gives us a lot more confidence to move forward with projects. But if it doesn't come until at all, if there's some kind of issue where we're not to get it, the graph at the bottom of this page shows how that would impact funding. We've talked about this before a little bit. I just kind of want to reiterate. The low-no funding would not be used for a project like the YTC project. It will only be used for hybrid and hydrogen vehicles, which is what was approved by the board and what we applied for. However, because that funding helps us in our bus replacement program, if we don't get it, then some of the other types of funding that we would be able to move to the YTC project wouldn't move to the YTC project, because you have to use it for state of good repair projects first. So the bar on the left shows the funding if for this particular project, if we get the low-no award. And on the right, it shows what would happen if we were not to get the low-no award. And so another implication of the budget process and the approvals that are being made are that if we were to continue the construction project as planned, we would not have the funding from our current formula or awarded grants. So what we're doing is we're still pursuing other grant opportunities like 5339, which is bus and bus facilities opportunities. We have a grant application in now, and if that funding comes through, then that green current contracts awarded would get bigger, and that yellow local capital reserve would get smaller. But the only source of funding we have besides grant awards is the local capital reserve. So I want to be transparent in sharing that our budget at this point assumes that we have the low-no funding and we would not need to use capital reserve. But if that changes, or if any other funding source changes, the local capital reserve is what we would start to rely on for capital projects. We would certainly come to the board. We have to get your approval to use it. And we would do that in advance of construction. So when you approve the construction policy, we would then tell you this is our planned funding source. And you'd certainly have the ability to say yes or no. So, but I do want to share that that's how this works, and that there are some budget approval or some impacts to not only the budget beyond 2026, but also potential funding sources. With that, I want to summarize the capital reserve. So we have long been sharing how much is in the capital reserve, what years we've received it. And so this is a summary of the capital reserve funds. We started receiving enough funding to create the capital reserve back in 2021. We funded it over several years, and now we're at 32.2 million or 32.3 million in the capital reserve. The current budget that we're presenting does assume that we're using all of the grant awards that we've been awarded, that we're able to obligate them and use them. And because of that, in total, we're not anticipating needing to use the capital reserve at any point before 2029. So you can see that we've built it up through 2023. We're not planning to use it or generate more reserve over the next few years. And then around 2029, we would start using it quickly, pending other funding sources. So just to also be clear, every time we ask you for an approval to pursue grants, the more grants funding we get, whether it's from federal or state or any other funding source that we may be able to get for a project, will improve this. It will make this look better. There may be some projects, as we get into some more detail, where we have to fund a local share of a project. Sometimes, if it's a project that, if it's a type of grant that we can't use state match for, then we're reserving the capital reserve for local share on other funding opportunities as well. So this can change, and we may start requesting capital reserve earlier if it is an opportunity to leverage it for more grant funding. So that's kind of the approach that we've been taking all along. We've said we're going to use capital reserve to leverage getting other funding to the extent possible. This is really our only source of local funding for capital projects to do such things. And it's a really valuable resource to have. So we want to save it and use it as prudently as possible and try to leverage it to get other funding. But I did want to share that right now, based on the assumptions in the budget, this is what the capital reserve would look like over the next few years. Yes.
So you're saying, I just want to make sure, like, so in the budget, do we call this the budget book or?
Yes,
Okay,
budget book, sure.
In the capital, for each of the projects, it says the RIDE is requesting, X amount of money for this project. So when you're saying here that you're requesting that does not mean that you're requesting it from the capital budget. So when we approve the budget, we are not going to be approving any transfer from the capital reserve.
No, that's correct. Yes, that's correct. No,
Yes.
you are not approving anything from the capital reserve. What that means is that's the amount of money we're asking for in the budget to spend. That doesn't designate a specific funding source at that point. However, it would be imprudent of us not to share with you our plan for funding.
Right.
And that's what I'm sharing with you here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about a couple of those things I mentioned? Sometimes it can get confusing. I want to pause for a second. Good. Okay. So in summary, I just want to have a few summary remarks about how things are going. First of all, this is a summary of what we'll be asking you to approve in September. There are likely going to be some minor changes. I've already mentioned something about the capital probably going down a little bit. Operating expenses look to be about right. But in total, you're going to see the resolution that's also in the budget book at the end is an illustrated version of what you could expect to see next month and what we'll be asking for. So the total expenses we'll be asking you to approve are around 102 million for fiscal year 2026, split up here in operating and capital. Additionally, I wanted to provide a longer picture context of what's happening with the millage funding and where we've been and where we're going. So you can see that we actually, we have the new millage. We're in place today. It's in place for several years to come. With that, the revenue and expense projections are shown here. So in the past, we've had some kind of wider gaps and narrow gaps. The wider gap there in the center, the few years before, is the pandemic relief funds that we were collecting. So we had more revenue than expenses. That funded the capital reserve. Now we're kind of just spending what we're getting. So that's what it looks to be, but it is a stable outlook for the foreseeable future. Also want to talk about cash flow because that's something that we always need to make sure we can sustain. As you can see here, we have significant projected cash balances to help fund all of the expenses that I just shared with you. You can see that in 2029, the projected cash balance really declines. That's really because we're starting to use the capital reserve. So I just showed you a graph a couple slides ago where we'd start to use that capital reserve to fund projects. And if that does occur, this is what it will look like in our cash balance. It's not alarming. There's a lot of time to phase these things in. There's a lot of time to try to look for additional grants or funding sources for our projects. And we can also make decisions that we're not going to spend all of that capital reserve that way. We can say, no, we want to continue to keep some of that reserve to leverage for more grant opportunities and then phase out some of those projects a little bit further so we have more time to generate funding, in which case that dark blue section of the stacked bar chart at the bottom will be sustained and not drop off like it does here. But this is a reflection of what we would expect to see if we followed that approach. But you can also see that cash for operations stays strong and stable through the projection period. So no concerns there. Our operating reserve continues to be fully funded, which is the green part of that bar. So again, strong cash position to maintain operations and progress towards our capital plan. And I don't want to be remiss in just not mentioning that we always have opportunities and risks within the budget and things that we're watching around. So just want to share a few things with you here. We have no debt. We have fully funded reserves. We do have an approved millage through 2028. We're executing on our long-range plan. And we're maintaining our services to our communities as well as working on continuous improvement and other improvements of what we have. Some of the risks that we have are the state LBO funding. We have a little bit of economic uncertainty. We do have labor negotiations coming up, and we cite that as a risk just because we're not exactly sure how that's going to go or what that will look like. So it's just something that could impact the last quarter of fiscal '26 and then future years to come. So those are things that we'll build in as we move further along in that process. As always, we have inflation. We have all kinds of issues related to that with tariffs and things like that. We are budgeting conservatively. We are preparing multiple scenarios for expenses to sort of try to plan for what might happen with some of these risks, but the budget represents our best guess at what will happen, or educated guess, I should say. But we are always looking at that. And we do have a lot of federal funding for capital. There's still a lot of grant opportunities out there that we're pursuing for the projects that we're getting ready to start, or even projects that are coming later. We take every opportunity that we can, that's feasible, that we think is feasible to pursue other funding sources. We're partnering with the city of Ann Arbor and the DDA on some other projects. So there's a lot of activity by all of our staff. It's a group effort for sure, in terms of trying to get as much funding as we can for these projects. And we feel very good about the position that we're in. But it is a risk because we don't always know what federal funding will be available. This is a summary of what our draft budget highlights are again, just that we're funded, budget is balanced, et cetera. And then I want to just go over a few of our next steps. So we're still working through staff development. Our budget has been available for public comment since August 1st. We're going to have a public hearing here just in a few minutes after we finish the presentation. We're still doing board committee reviews through the month of September. So if there are updates along the way, we're going to tell you what those updates are so that when we get to the budget meeting where we're recommending approval in September, you know what's in the budget, you're understanding the assumptions, and we've highlighted any changes that have come. The other thing I want to point out, not only for our board, but for the public, is that our budget is presented and on our website. So if you would like to review the full budget document in detail, that is there. It's also open for inspection at 2700 South Industrial for the public and for anyone else. And with that, I'm going to conclude my comments and ask if there are any additional questions or if you'd like to have any other discussion about anything. Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I don't know if we're allowed to say that. But
I don't take it personally.
Okay. Small things. One, your slide shows the budget approval on the 19th, and I think our board meeting's the 18th.
Yes, thank you. We'll make sure to update that.
Okay.
It will be the 18th.
Okay. Second, I just had two very small questions. The first, as regards to operating expenses, I see salary, wages, and benefits are up 1.6 million. Is that due to an increase in staff, or is that benefit and salary increases? How is 1.6 million?
Yeah, it's salaries and benefits increases primarily. We have not added any new FTEs in terms of total headcount. We have had some adjustments as people leave. We always reevaluate whether or not we still need those positions. It's just part of our continuous improvement approach to that. We do have, so we are still budgeting for the same number that we were budgeting before because we don't have, at this point, we don't know that we have a sustainable resource to add staff through this millage period. And so, yes, it's basically the salaries, and the assumptions are in your book on what we're assuming, both in salaries, wages, and benefits. But essentially, we follow our bargaining unit agreement. The biggest part of our labor cost is related to operations, as we've talked about before, which is a good thing. But that is set in their contract, what their increases are, so we budget for those. And our benefits increases, probably increasing around 9 to 10% right now. So that's the general area that we're in on those increases.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just had one small second question, and it's as regards to the slide about the millage funding.
Yeah.
The slide shows sort of the history, and then it shows the point at which the current millage would end. Does the continuation assume an increase in the millage amount? Or is that because, fair revenues are going up or local revenue? What suggests that ongoing increase in that line?
Yeah, so how we budget the projection for future revenue, we're budgeting future revenues in total, not necessarily the millage specifically. It does not assume an increase in the millage. We're assuming that the revenue that we get now in total increases by, I think it's about 3%. So we'll have to determine a little bit later, based on other revenue sources, what we would need to ask for to fund what we have today, or the potential for any other things we might want to fund related to the long-range plan. And we would factor in all revenue sources before we would set a proposed millage rate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does Mike have any questions, Deb? Okey doke. Thank you, Dina, we appreciate you.
Thanks, everyone.
Going to move on to the public hearing, 7.1.1. I have a script to read to begin the process. In accordance with the Budget Hearings of Local Governments Act, local units are required to hold a public hearing on a proposed budget. I will need a motion to suspend the regular board meeting and to move to open the public hearing. Would someone like to make a motion? Susan, seconded by Rich. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. And so now we are able to hear public comment. Deb, I don't see anyone in here. Do we have anyone online?
We do not have anyone online.
Oh, well, that was a quick public hearing. We have to close it formally, though. Public comments are now concluded. I will need a motion to close the public hearing and resume the regular board meeting. Would someone like to make that motion? Susan, seconded by Georgia. And all those in favor, raise your hands. And thank you very much. That passed unanimously. We will now go back into our regular board meeting. The next on our agenda is the BTC authorizations, and that is Ms. Dina Reed and Mr. Forrest Yang.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'll start. What we're presenting to you today on agenda item 7.2 for authorization for grant and funding requests for the BTC project. This project is progressing. There's been a lot of activity as of late, and there are some grant opportunities that we foresee coming. And so we are working with some partners. I mentioned the city of Ann Arbor, the DDA, and potentially pursuing some grant opportunities. But before we can do that, the policy 2.1 requires the CEO to seek explicit board approval before we can proceed with advanced stages of projects and funding. So what we're asking for today is approval to pursue grant funding to fund the BTC expansion project. As described in your documents, it is a budgeted project. And we are asking to submit grant applications for grants or outside funding, proceed with detailed architecture or engineering, and potentially conduct real estate transactions. That's what the revenue will be used for. So that is what we're requesting of you today. I'm happy to answer any questions about the funding, or Forrest is here. We're jointly presenting this because if you have detailed questions about the project itself, Forrest is better to answer those questions than I.
Does the board have any questions? So basically what we're doing is we're catching up with all of the paperwork that we did for the YTC. The YTC, we did it all in one big lump. This one sort of got separated out and we learned from that. So that's all we're doing.
Yes.
Okay. If there are no questions, would someone like to make the recommended motion? Rich? So the board authorizes the CEO to submit grant applications and funding requests as necessary to fund the project for the proposed BTC expansion as described below. So first, Rich made a motion, seconded by Susan. Any discussion on the motion as it was made? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor, raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Next on our agenda is fiscal year 25 financial report for quarterly 3, and that is back to you, Dina.
Thank you. Agenda 7.3 in your packet is the third quarter financial statement. The financial statements were presented to the Finance Committee earlier this month, reviewed in detail. Essentially, things are pretty much on track at the end of the third quarter compared to budget and compared to where our current projections have been. We do expect expenses to increase slightly in the fourth quarter, as is normal. Once you get to the end of the year, a lot of times people really, finish out spending some of those projects, ramp it up. We also have financial things like accruals and things like that we rebook in the fourth quarter. So we are trending actually favorable on expenses to budget. We are trending favorable on operating revenues as well. So the net surplus right now, if we ended the year at the third quarter, would be $3.5 million. We do not expect to end the year with that level of surplus because we do expect expenses to go up in the fourth quarter. We do expect to have sufficient cash flow to pay for those items. So no concerns from me on the income statement. On the balance sheet, again, it just shows that the current level of assets are still strong, maintaining strong operating reserve balance. As I mentioned during the budget presentation, our new operating reserve target is 2.0, and we are at or above that over the next few months. So no concerns about needing to use that reserve in the near term. You can see that the list of capital reserves, which are all fully funded and have not changed in the last year or two because we're not using those reserves, but they're there for a safeguard for us. Further down, you can look at some of the, not a lot of changes with our investments either. They're performing very well. Typically what we do is as some of those investments mature, we roll them into new investments very similar to the ones that they have. We've been fortunate and in each case, when we roll them into something new, we're seeing significant increases in interest revenue that is coming through the operating statement as expected, and that's why it looks like we have a lot more revenue on the income statement when we talk about other revenues, because that is interest income that we're getting from the additional investments that the higher interest rates on the investments that we have. So that concludes my comments on the third quarter financial statements, and I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
Anyone have any questions for Ms. Reed? Mike Alamang? You might be muted, Mike. I can't hear you.
Sorry, that should be better. I just want to very briefly mention the Finance Committee reviews the financials, the income and balance sheet quarterly. We've in more detail than is discussed at the board meeting. Every quarter has been solid performance. All 3 quarters have been very solid. I personally, and I believe the Finance Committee also believes TheRide is in very solid financial shape, and we don't have any significant concerns for the fourth quarter. We will end up with another very good year financially.
Thank you, Mike. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you again.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the CEO report and legislative updates. That's Mr. Matt Carpenter and Mr. Jeff Pfeiffer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last month I forgot Jeff's report, so this time I'm going to ask him to go first.
Sounds good. Just a couple of things to report on the legislative side. On the state side, I think everyone is aware our main focus right now is on LBO. Just somewhat of a political insight. Conversations between the Speaker and Senate Majority Leader do not appear to be happening. I'm hoping that it is able to work itself out in the coming weeks as we approach the October deadline. We are seeing some I guess, oddities from the Republican caucus in the House. The Senate or the House Appropriations Chair yesterday stated we should be seeing House budget documents pretty soon. Hours later, the Speaker, who is her boss, said that's probably not going to happen. So I think, we're seeing just kind of the fluidity and lack of communication going on in Lansing, but we'll obviously keep a close eye on it heading towards that October 1st deadline. And then on the federal side, the Senate passed their THUD bill, and we saw full funding for 5339, so that is a good sign. That also appeared in the House appropriations budget, and then also President Trump's budget recommendation. So that is good to see transit fully funding for 5339 in all of the iterations. And then in the Senate THUD bill, there was a language included that allows agencies to acquire real property before the completion of NEPA, which is a really big step and a positive thing to see for a lot of agencies. I know that'll help a lot of folks out. And then on the earmark, I have reported in various committees. As you remember, we did put in an earmark request for just over $1 million. We ended up giving $750,000 from a combination of Senator Slotkin and Senator Peters. That was included in the full Senate Appropriations THUD bill. Not quite a done deal yet, but definitely a positive sign. Happy to answer any questions.
Do you have any questions for Jeff? Seeing none yet, were you going to do your CEO thing now, or?
Sure. Thank you. And I'll start by asking Jeff to say a few words about the ridership campaign, which is in the CEO report on page 49.
Yes, so our new and exciting ridership campaign is starting to trickle out. Part of that is kind of a change in what we've done in the past to try to make it a little bit more edgy and whimsical in a sense. It's going to be a multi-pronged approach, and the first prong that has gone live is basically, it's your money. So we're really pointing out to folks, transportation is the second largest expense for most families. So if you didn't have a car payment, what would you do with a very conservative $650 a month? And we actually partnered with some local businesses. We partnered with Zingerman's, Joe's Pizza, and some other folks to kind of show how you could use extra money in kind of a humorous way. It's buying 30 pizzas or having plenty of Zingerman's or spoiling your dog. So really taking an interesting approach, and some of the video clips, I think I included a Dungeons and Dragons play in the CEO report. So overall, just really exciting. We do have a few billboards up in Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. So we've gotten really positive feedback thus far. You'll start to see it build into the second prong, which is about to go live. It's your time. Basically, the ability for folks to use the ride as a mobile office during their commute, not have to deal with parking structures. We have a pretty good radio spot going out for that. And then as this campaign progresses, we'll start to see the more it's your community, some of the environmental feel, and then just the community helping aspect. So really exciting campaign, and then overall it's been very fun to shoot, and we've seen really good feedback from folks.
Excellent. Any questions for Jeff on that? Yes, Susan.
Is that your dog?
It is, yes.
Spoil my dog. So I wondered, I think your dog has got some leverage here. This is great.
I think it's gone right to his head.
This is
Extra
terrific.
treats are being demanded.
This is great.
Any other questions or comments? All right, Matt, would you like to? Oh, sorry, Jess.
I mean, I did see some skepticism online that people could afford that much from Zingerman's with only $650.
Wait, somebody did the math, and it was like you could buy one sandwich a day a month. Not a fancy one, though. So, yeah.
Mike is online. He'd like to make a comment, please.
Yes, I was just wondering, by the way, I really am very pleased with this campaign, but I'm wondering, is there any way that you will have in the future to measure the effectiveness of this campaign?
Absolutely. The thing with marketing, the biggest metric we can look at is, does ridership increase? And if it does, we'll take full credit for it. Other than that, Mike, with some of our digital ads and things we're doing on Facebook, we do get viewership metrics, how many folks see it. One of the interesting things is, particularly for our Instagram, when we're running stuff, folks who are now viewing our ads don't typically follow us, which means that it is reaching out to a wider audience than we've seen in the past. That coupled with just higher engagement, I think over the past 6 months, our engagement levels really increased. But the true thing that we'll look at is, did ridership increase?
Any other questions, Mike?
No.
Matt, I think we're back to you. Or who are you passing it off to now? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I'm running out of stalling. So thank you very much. I also want to note in the CEO report that I believe our trademark stuff has finally come through. So congratulations to Jeff's team for seeing that one through. You know, it took 50 some odd years, but we got it. So that's good. I also want to congratulate Forrest and his team for their work getting NEPA done on the YTC. George and his team have been doing a fabulous job keeping the wheels on the buses turning in spite of lots of detours, lots of construction, and one unexpected water main explosion on South Industrial Avenue a couple weeks ago. We never met, we kept going. Dina and her team are obviously very busy here in budget season. And things are generally going well. We've had a lot of local sort of political discussions recently, but I think all of that is behind us, which is fine. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the CEO report.
Any questions for Matt? Rich?
Just one. So I was kind of curious for the free ride weekends with the library cards, so I know they show their card, but do we get any metrics on that?
I believe so. I think there's a button that the MCOs press, so we will get a full readout of at the end how many times they press the button. So yes.
Mike? I believe you might be muted.
Okay, there I go. Regarding the Blake Transit Center, you have there at the very bottom, there will be a application for a Michigan Talent Partnership Program grant, which would help fund some of the improvements. There's no mention of what is in the minutes of the governance committee meeting for the month of July, which is the last meeting. There was something about $3.5 million coming from the state to help us fund the improvements on the 4th Avenue project. I'm trying to reconcile that not being mentioned in this particular piece.
Sure. So I'll do my best, and then perhaps Forrest and Dina can correct me when I invariably get it wrong. So as you just did a little while ago, you've authorized us to pursue funding opportunities for the BTC. We will go after any funding from anywhere. With this particular one, I believe we were approached by the city. Is that right? So this is a city-led grant. It really has to do more with downtown street spaces. It's not a transportation grant per se, but it could be used for cosmetic is probably not a good enough word. Some serious structurally cosmetic improvements on 4th Avenue that would offset some of the costs of expanding the Blake in the vision that the DDA has for 4th Avenue. So with your support, we're going to be a part of that city effort. I think I understand that to be $18 million, but it's not specified to any city, so it's a competitive grant.
Yes, I would add, I can't speak directly to what was in the governance committee report because I don't remember, but what is happening, and I think I know where that number is derived from, there are a couple different opportunities that we're looking at, both with the city and with the DDA, to fund the BTC. We don't have an award for that, which is why it wouldn't be in the CEO report. We typically don't mention that we have funding until we have it. So we haven't applied, but with your approval today, we will be applying, most likely, for some grant funding related to the BTC project. And when we know what happens from that, we will report it.
If I could add to Mike's comment, and I have our governance committee notes popped up. Under 4th Street funding update, it said that Mr. Carpenter reported that AAATA has secured 3.5 mil in funding from the state to support the 4th Street project. Perhaps we need to wordsmith that and take that out?
I don't recall saying that. Perhaps it's a typo. I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. Forrest, does this sound familiar to you? I don't think we've secured.
We do have $200,000 grant awarded
Yeah.
for 4th Avenue project. That's the total amount we have.
What would the 3.3 be about?
So I think the other grants that we're looking at may be around that amount pursuing, but we haven't completed the application. We couldn't do that without approval, so.
So perhaps what we could do is change the words from has secured is to is pursuing.
That would probably be more reflective of what we intended to say at the governance committee.
Okay. Good catch, Mike. Any other questions or comments for the CEO? All right, seeing none, we have emergent items next, and if you would allow me a little bit of latitude, I forgot under general announcements to remind the board that we are assembling our audit task force. Deadline to apply is September 15th. I only have one person. We like 3 to 4 people on the committee. So if you could think about that and get back with me via email if you are interested. Thank you for your latitude. Next on the agenda, pardon me, is closing items, action item recap. Deb.
Yes, thank you. So I have a few things. The first one is a note that the governance committee is going to review the wording in policy 3333, which is related to commending staff outside of monitoring discussions. So they're going to look at that policy. I have a note for looking into future board education on the responsibility of board members for ownership linkage and coordinated advocacy. I will be updating the board policy manual to include in the appendix the reasonableness document, which was approved in the consent agenda. And then also the board had approved policy 3.2.13. So I'll be updating to reflect those changes. And then I'll have to look up the exact portion, but there will be a slight update to the governance notes to reflect pursuing to replace secured with funding, and it was for, but it was for the
State Street, 4th.
State Street, thank you.
I'm sorry.
I would
4th Street.
find it, but okay. And that was all I had, thank you.
Was there also a request for information on ownership linkage?
Yes, and that will come
That
through the
was
governance
the board
process.
education.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, board education, and we'll talk about that in December, I believe.
Thank you.
Good catch, ma'am. Any other, did we miss anything? All right, we'll move on then to topics for next meeting. We will actually look at our budget approval. It's really important for us to have quorum in September. Fiscal year 25 quarterly 3 service report, financial planning and budgeting 2.4, which is in conjunction with the budget, and then officer elections. In the future, we will still be looking at hearing about state funding and being educated on how that comes through. Our next board meeting is Thursday, September 18th, here at the Ann Arbor District Library downtown, and it will start at 6:30 p.m. And right now, we're going to go right into public comment. Deb, is there anyone online?
We have no public comment.
Okay, that will close public comment, and then I would like to entertain a motion for adjournment. Susan, Rich, any discussion on that? I didn't think so. All those in favor, raise your hand. Very good, everyone. Have a good rest of your night.
This is a new record for how much I've misjudged